Nigeria's Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has filed to join a legal dispute involving Dangote Refinery and oil companies, arguing that restricting certain firms from operating could create a monopoly in favor of Dangote Refinery. Now, the Commission insists that Nigeria's free market economy must prevent anti-competitive prices and practices. However, Dangote Refinery countered that its actions aim to revamp local refining and not establish a monopoly, accusing the FCCPC of lacking jurisdiction in petroleum matters. Now, to discuss this, I'm being joined by Uzochukwu Obienu, who is partner, tax, regulatory, and people services at KPMG Nigeria. Thank you so much, Mr. Obienu, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, why is there so much fear about the possibility of the Dangote Refinery monopolizing the downstream sector? Are there valid facts or events that fuel this fear?
Well, I guess it's important to provide a little bit of background, and then from there it's possible for us to see why all of the conversation has been going on in the recent past. It's not news that we do not have enough refining capacity at the moment from outside of the Dangote Refinery. We are not essentially, we're not egalitarian as far as energy security from the downstream sector is concerned. And so when you have one very dominant player with a very, very massive refinery, 650,000 barrel capacity refinery, it's not uncommon for people to begin to think that what does this portend for me? What does it portend for the country? And what does it portend for the consumers? So it's against all of this conversation. What I Court is trying to come on is, well, we heard on stream, but I can't say for sure. Worry also on stream, but you have a very, very dominant player. And so the conversation is, do we see a possibility of one person being the price maker, which is the whole argument around competition and fair pricing and all of that. It's really about how dominant the player is. So that's the background to all of the conversation. Is it factual? Is it real? Well, what I would say is that the petroleum industry is one that is extremely transparent. Prices in terms of the major input into the refined product is the crude, the transportation, the holding cost and all of that. Those costs are easily verifiable. They are costs that are quite transparent. So it's easy for one to say what's the landing cost for refined product today. It's easy to determine that. And so it's, at the end of the day, it will come down to pricing, it will come down to fairness from players and things like that. But I like to say that there's nothing really hidden in the petroleum industry globally. And so the question around dominance, the question around fairness and all of that, it's one that can be easily, we can easily find out what is happening within the industry.
Okay, let's now look at the position of the refinery. It said that, on the contrary to those speculations, it is seeking to revamp local refining in the country. And I'm wondering if this position holds waters for you.
Yes, it holds waters on one side, being that prior to the commissioning of the Dangote Refinery, we have a few other refiners, but in terms of the capacity, in terms of what they are able to do and being able to meet the energy needs in the country, it wasn't possible for the active refineries that were on ground prior to the commissioning of the Dangote Refinery to meet the local needs. So essentially, we needed to import. So we were importing to fill up the gap. But with the coming on stream of the Dangote Refinery, we can actually decide that we do not want to import, and the Dangote Refinery is able to meet that need. So if you are asking whether, yes, the statement made is factual, yes. The capacity of the refinery is such that it can actually feed the entire nation.
So if this happens and Dangote Refinery wins this case over domestic refining, is there a possibility that independent refiners are at risk of being pushed out of the market?
I think there is enough room for everybody to play. That's the way I like to look at it. Everybody that is interested in energy sufficiency for our country, everybody that is interested in playing in that space locally. I don't think that there's any restriction in terms of who gets, once you have the necessary feasibility studies, you do your impact assessment, and the NMDPRA come to the inspection, they can actually grant you the license to begin to build a refinery. Trust me, there are a number of refineries that are in the works as we speak. Some are already producing, but it's just that they are small players. So in terms of crowding out independent refiners, unless we're looking at people who import outside of Nigeria and bring into the country, or who have their refineries outside of the Nigerian shores. But locally, I have not, in fact, the refiners that we had prior to now, there's never been an issue of not being able to get their products into the market, even though most of them were focused on AGO rather than PMS. So it's big enough. The sky is big enough to accommodate anybody that wants to go into the business. As we're speaking, we know that BUA is putting up something decent as well in terms of the refinery that they're trying to put in place. So it will come down to pricing. It will come down to fair competition. So it's not about crowding out, but how then do you ensure that there is fairness in the competition, and then hopefully it will also help us, the consumers, in terms of pricing. I always tell people, think about when we had just two network providers for the telecoms world. I mean, you could pretty much say that that's a duopoly, very close to a monopoly. But with effective regulation, NCC, and competition and all of that, customers were protected, and ultimately we don't even feel like we owe it to anybody. We can actually port, but this is even easier. If your pricing is not good, if the product is not good, the consumers will know, and the consumers will abort your everything that they're doing with you. Once they realize that you're not being fair, it's easy to even cut off a refiner that is not doing what it's supposed to do in this case. So I think that the sky is big enough, people can participate, and the regulators will then have to do their work and do it very well to ensure that consumers are protected.
Okay, so talking about fairness, in this case, in the issuance of licenses, according to reports, Dangote Refinery's grouse is said to be based on allegations of improper issuance of import licenses for refined petroleum products to other companies. Now, the refinery contends that these licenses were granted despite sufficient domestic production, and it said that it violates the Petroleum Industry Act. So I'm wondering if this case is valid for you.
Well, I think you need to bear in mind that we're talking about business people, and business people will go to any length to ensure that they are able to secure a sizable chunk of the market at every point in time. At the time that the Petroleum Industry Act was signed into law, but to be honest with you, we were, so if you look at it strictly, we were completely dependent on import. So those provisions essentially were suspended. In fact, the president at the time even suspended the portion of the law that relates to subsidy. So if you want to hold on to the PIA specifically alone, it may not be the only thing that you should be looking at within this context, because there is also within the PIA also the role of the regulator in terms of protecting consumers from monopoly on wholesome practices and having one price maker. So it's a whole lot of things in there. And the way I choose to look at it is that, look, there are things that are important. The first thing is that we need energy sufficiency. It's very critical. We need to be able to, as a nation, not depend on importation alone as the source of our energy. Then it's also important that there is competition, because, and those are the two things that you necessarily have to balance in this particular case. While there's the argument for, oh, well, we don't need to import, there's the argument for competition, and the healthy competition is always necessary where you have a business, in a business environment, so that consumers are protected. So it's that effective balance that is the real work of the regulator. While on the one hand, you don't want to discourage the business, someone that has taken the pains of investing in Nigeria in the most turbulent of times and has given us this very world-class refinery. You are also looking at it and saying, well, we have this, but we also need to ensure that issues around pricing and all of that, you want to be able to manage it and such that we can have the benefits of healthy competition. To my mind, the way to go is to see how other refiners can also be encouraged. I am very big on whatever is happening locally and how we can harness local resources for the benefit of the country. So where I'm looking forward to it is where we have the refineries that are owned by the government working, the refineries that are owned by private participants that are coming on stream also working, and then of course the Dangote Refinery also is continuing to refine products such that it's a very beautiful mix of sufficiency and also managing concerns around monopoly, concerns around price makers and all of that. That's the way I would like to see our downstream sector ultimately play out.
Okay, so just to wrap things up, I'm listening to you now and I'm trying to figure it out. Like, if you think the NNPCL can adequately supply crude to the refinery, we're talking about 650,000 barrels per day capacity refinery, with the coming on board of local refineries that you've mentioned, then there should be no need for fuel imports. Then it may also insulate Nigeria from global price. Then we should be looking at healthy competition, which may also lead to reduction in petrol price. Is that a summation of what you're presented now?
Absolutely. I think you've captured it right. Yeah, we need to get to the point where we do more locally. And that's the experience of countries who have been able to properly harness the resources. We need to have more refineries working in Nigeria. We need to encourage existing refineries. And then ultimately, we need to ensure that the consumers are properly protected from any unwholesome practices that may arise from having a few people only being in charge of such an important commodity for the nation.
So the issue is around possible monopolization of the markets, competition, quality pricing and all that. Well, we hope that at the end of the day, these players will be able to come to a consensus to fashion out something that would be beneficial to Nigeria's downstream sector and, of course, to Nigerians. Uzochukwu Obienu, a partner, tax, regulatory and people services at KPMG Nigeria, thank you so much for your time on the show.
Thank you for having me.